Grand. Well, thank you for kind of turning up on the day after the conference dinner, which obviously tends to be a late one for for many people. So I feel honoured that you've chosen me. So this is not talk about code and kind of. I'm not going to be showing any C++. There'll be no talking about. Well, actually, there will be some talk about threading and stuff, but as a tangent to stuff. But no, this is a talk about ensemble and pair programming and collaboration stuff, and it's kind of a game of two halves. And I always like first half is kind of around the skepticism side of things, addressing what possibly people think it's about, notably managers and people versus what it is about, or at least what I found it to be about. So I've been a developer for 30 years or so, kind of working in finance and C++ for a long time and more recently C# and stuff. So I'm kind of a full-time developer. The last 10 years or so, the last sort of 10 years or so, about 6 of those have spent pairing and kind of mobbing in teams, in most of the teams I've worked in. And so this is kind of, my sort of take on that kind of practice. As always, one size never fits all. There are definitely areas where I'm sure that I've in industries I've never worked in where there's very good reasons why it kind of doesn't work. But certainly the kind of application side of things I've been in, it's kind of, that's the sort of the area that I have of expertise, so I can talk about that. But having never really worked in a deep kind of research or an academic thing, I'm sure it's not the same. So, where do I start? So there's a sort of the updated title is there's sort of a bit of a terminology thing. So I'll address that first. The term mobbing came about from Woody Zoll, and since it came about, it turned out that term actually hasn't have. For some of us, it was kind of a mixed thing, but in some cultures, definitely mobbing is very much a bad thing. And it does not have the other kind of connotation that we have. So this is a joke I made about our company's been doing mob programming for years. They stand out the developers and strong arm them into doing 80 hours a week, which is obviously the other meaning of mobbing that turns out to be more recognizable to people than the real one. So it's sort of kind of taken a bit of a name change, and often you might hear it more commonly termed as ensemble programming. So if I say mobbing, hopefully I'll kind of keep up to date and use the right term, but occasionally, because it's quite short and succinct, I think it still like lives on in quite a bit. So just know that kind of mobbing on ensemble is the same thing, but ensemble's a nicer, slightly more polite kind of like term. So first part, I want to talk about productivity in programming, kind of a bit of a hot topic from the last sort of few years in particular, because I think that a lot of the misconceptions that kind of come around it come about because of our view of what productivity means in when kind of developing software. So I've sort of considered it the kind of the elephant in the room, and hopefully you'll kind of see why, and then how that kind of comes into it. And a latecomer. There you go. I said I was going to mention a little bit of threading and stuff. So back at my first ACCU conference, I think it was 2007, 2008, I think pair programming it was capturing the imagination. And I remember, I think I was talking to Pete Goodliff in the bar late one night, as it always was, and I was like, how does that kind of work? Because like thinking about CPUs and, traditionally in a SMP systems back then, you could add another processor, but if you had another processor, you never got like 100% of the extra capacity. There was always sort of some, it was never quite the same unless something was sort of trivially parallelizable. So thinking about, if you have 2 people working on one task, how does that work? How can that go twice as fast? Does that go twice as fast? What was that kind of stuff was about? So I was kind of intrigued by then as to how that kind of worked. And I came to it from this kind of like mindset, sort of, in a sense I had sort of Amdahl's law in my head that kind of talked to it, thinking about, well, there's the trivially parallelizable work, and then there's the kind of like the sequential work, and actually, does it sort of fit in this sweet spot of where it's like mostly parallel kind of thing? And obviously it didn't. And what I had missed, and that's for the same reason that symmetric multiprocessing at that time particularly, is the thing that means you only get 60% of the CPU in a lot of cases, the coordination. And it's the coordination that kind of goes on behind the scenes. In this sense, it's like cache synchronization and that kind of stuff. And those are things that you kind of don't realize. But that's the reason why, it's like having two people on one task. It was very much touted as teams will go faster in the same way that practicing TDD allows somebody to deliver faster. But the notion of faster wasn't that two people could type code faster. That's not what the faster means. And in the same way, this is not about that faster, as in a feature. It's not two people typing at the keyboard and stuff. So it's kind of there's a misunderstanding there around what it means to have kind of two people on. But that was definitely my kind of mental model in the early days of what this was about and why that might be kind of useful. That's the kind of technical bit. So last year, there was a particularly notable report that came out, was the McKinsey report, which is a big kind of company who did some work and came up with their notion of what productivity is and what a good development process might be. Like many people, I kind of read it, and there are definitely some people who have made some far more poignant observations and things about it. But the thing that I found immediately kind of caught my attention was this idea that there was this sort of kind of inner loop area where it's like, yeah, this is where we churn out the code. And then there was like this thing that meetings were kind of outside of that sort of thing. And I was like, so I'm immediately thinking, well, where's the sort of the collaboration and talking to my customer and making sure that I'm actually doing kind of what it is they want me to do and that kind of stuff. And it felt like, and unless I've misread the report, I think I've already read it at least twice, that was sort of kind of missing. It was very much seen as, they were looking at it from the perspective of, kind of like meetings or anything, but other forms of collaboration just kind of didn't get it. I mean, they didn't say that it didn't sort of fit, maybe models of pairing stuff, but it did feel like there was very much a kind of like, head down kind of like, typing, churning out kind of stuff and going around that loop. So I called this the kind of like the McKinsey loop, is this idea that basically you just go around the loop and, you don't kind of stick your head up and actually work out whether it is you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, that's actually useful kind of thing. So, so again, this is sort of feel like a kind of, and again, obviously, some big companies kind of take this thing on and they're going, oh, well, that's what we should be doing. And that's what's important. So let's kind of, and so maybe they miss out on more useful stuff. Okay, so what sort of tied in again with that kind of big, maybe corporate kind of structure, is this idea, so back in the 60s, I think it was, Peter Drucker started to talk about measuring and so we kind of got a little bit obsessed with stuff about measuring. There's various quotes around measuring stuff. You can't improve what you can't measure, and there was various quotes I could have put on the slide. I picked Tom Gill because Tom Gill's visited ACCU many times, and I've seen him. He did a couple of really cool lightning talks over the years. He's a person who you can challenge to say quantify something, and he'll come up with it. So one year he was asked to quantify love, and then in a keynote, and then he came back and he did a lightning talk, and he quantified love. And then somebody else another year said, "Can you quantify music?" And again, he rose to the challenge. Came back and he quantified music. Now, he picked a number of different quantities. I think for the music one, it was like maybe it's about sales, maybe it's about popularity on radio. His point was not that. His point was that you can quantify stuff. There's this quote from Peopleware, which is a great book if you get a chance to read it. It's still highly relevant. That there are metrics and stuff that are useful. You can create metrics, but it's working out what their useful kind of stuff is. But ultimately, that idea, what he was trying to get across was that it's not about picking easy ones. Obviously, it's about picking metrics that are kind of like useful. So thinking about kind of the way we're sort of delivering stuff, coming up with things which are useful to help us work out whether we're kind of improving as a team. So I thought I'd start with a kind of like the opposite end. It's like, hey, what are not good metrics? And actually, what are some of those metrics that I've ended up working to, which have been really unhelpful, and probably help explain, again, why maybe there's a reluctance to this sort of practice. So these are some of the poor measurements I kind of came up with. So a classic one is like number of lines of code delivered and functions. There was one of the earliest stories I remember was in, I think it's Writing Solid Code by Steve Maguire. And he was talking about the way that they got into the situation where, because of the way like schedules and things were done, people would write the stubs of functions and then they would be committed, but the stub would be empty. And that would mean that they'd kind of delivered the feature, but then in the test phase, they were allowed to fix it. So actually what they did was did all the implementation in the test phase and stuff, but ultimately, hey, we've delivered all our function points and stuff. So that's obviously a classically kind of bad one, number of lines of code kind of delivered. And that immediately asks the questions, if you delete a whole load of code, have you, like, your productivity gone through the floor? I mean, what does that even mean, kind of thing? And yet most people will agree that obviously deleting code is actually a really good thing. So if it's unused, that is. Yeah, so lines of code is something bad. A more common, maybe a more recent one, commits and pull requests. Again, it's kind of, it's kind of sort of similar. It's about, volume of stuff that you've managed to chuck out. Again, let's just break things down and maybe write one line in a commit and that kind of stuff. But yeah, or pull requests and stuff. These two, commits and pull requests and bug fix, I have quite a nasty kind of personal experience about actual productivity affecting. So Jira tickets closed, bugs fixed is another one. I was at doing a contract, and there was a very awkward moment where this is one where we were kind of doing pairing and ensemble programming for the entire duration of 6 months. And the account manager ended up having to, came in and had a conversation. He said that the client had been on, and he was questioning why I was even on the team, because he sort of said, these other people seem to be doing stuff, but this Chris doesn't seem to be doing much. Do we need him? Can we kind of get rid of him? And it turned out that despite the fact that I'd been in every stand-up, I was putting stuff on the chat, I wrote a lot of the wiki documentation that went in, my name was on the commits, pull requests. The thing they measured was the Jira tickets. And none of my name was not only on like one ticket, because Jira didn't allow us to have the version they had more than one person on the ticket. So their only measurement was Jira tickets closed, and that was the one place that I was kind of invisible on. And again, they were sort of questioning this whole kind of ensemble thing because, they didn't see it. That was their only way of measuring the productivity of the team and process. Actually, we went in and gained the system and shared out tickets even if we weren't working on. But I'll come back to that in a minute, because that's obviously, yeah. And then the last one, hours worked. How many hours have you spent in the office? That obviously means you're productive because you're kind of sat there. And again, it's a shame Fran's not here. I ended up working for her manager that she'd worked with, somebody who actually went around with a clipboard and kind of like timed people. And this is not actually that long ago. 10, 15 years ago, checking how long. And again, his view of productivity, everything was entirely around number of hours you spent kind of in the office. Actually, you'd even notice if you were at home when you went offline on instant messenger and would then ask you a question just to kind of like see how long you were on. Whole kind of stuff is very sort of toxic. Definitely not ways of measuring a team and how well they might be doing as a kind of a group. And actually, this leads to Goodhart's Law, which kind of a software technology conference without mentioning Goodhart's Law. Somebody would have mentioned him along with Conway's Law somewhere, which is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So, so thinking about kind of a team and whether the kind of practices of people working together are working, we need to come up with, we need to look at things in kind of a different way. All those things that we've seen kind of measured there are very much kind of outputs, whereas we want to focus on kind of outcomes. Looking kind of like further down the line, it's not number of hours, but ideally we should be looking right at the end where the customer is or what we're kind of delivering from them, not kind of how much stuff we churn out. There. So if you can have a favourite part of the Agile Manifesto, it seems a bit weird. At least the one aspect of the Agile Manifesto that I've kind of committed to heart and kind of think of is this the notion that working software is the primary measure of progress. It kind of ties into some other stuff, classic things that always be ready to ship kind of mentality, that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, it's kind of the big part is the, that word kind of like working, that idea that, we have a product and we're kind of involving it. And that's ultimately where we're kind of like driving our notion of what we're doing, what productivity is for the team. Are we continuing to deliver more functionality that is working? And working isn't just there are kind of like no bugs. It's more than that. It's like, are we actually solving the problems that we need to solve? Are we delivering the features that they kind of really want and they can make use of kind of whatever the product? So that's the kind of the outcomes that we're looking at, which we then kind of want to then feed back through the team, and then the team can then kind of adapt its ways and practices and stuff to try and ensure that that's the kind of the thing. So for me, thinking about the whole sort of delivery pipeline, kind of, let's try and make sure that we're always kind of focused on that. In a rare moment of whatever it is, I actually tweeted something that wasn't a pun for once, and it turned out to be copper. And it was more a rant, really, again at the time about having a conversation with somebody about kind of like productivity and stuff, and people thinking very much about their kind of like their own productivity, that sort of very much a local optimization. And I've had this more recently as well. Which feeds into the whole kind of pull requests and stuff that we'll kind of see in a minute. But this idea that it's how much I deliver in a very kind of short time frame, whereas I was like, well, no, this software development's not a sprint, despite what maybe the Scrum organization might have you believe. It's a marathon and then some, maybe even an ultra marathon. This stuff goes on, and actually we need to kind of focus on a long game. So if we're thinking about, again, that word working software, we need to think about kind of sustainable, the team being able to sustain delivery, and that comes from, ensuring that the code base is in a healthy state, and we have other stuff like tests and practices, and the code is understandable, and we can kind of evolve it safely, and it doesn't kind of disintegrate. So I very much saw this as also arguments around people who maybe did some local testing, but weren't kind of embracing regression testing or other forms of automation and code analysis and stuff as a way of ensuring kind of a sort of a healthy kind of code base. I very much again see this. Most of the software systems I've worked on, at minimum probably of 10 years. I mean, and probably when I started on them, they might have been 10 years. I work on a lot of pretty much legacy stuff, but very rarely a kind of bit of a greenfield stuff. Occasionally, but even those, I've been on them for a few years, enough to see them evolve, in direction, and to see whether they actually ended up kind of that way rather than throwing something in and then kind of running away. So, so this is a long game, and that's again, this is, as we'll see, the practices are intended to feed into that idea. So when we talk about delivering faster, we are talking about over a long period of time, not talking about on a day or kind of a 2-day basis. Excuse me. Right, enough of me. You want to see my face? You can see it here. And actually, another kind of related quote, I think, that kind of feeds into this idea of longevity is Gall's law. A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that works. So incremental development is obviously kind of like quite it's obviously a modern thing, less so when this book was written, as you can tell from the cover, a very long time ago. That idea of, sort of incremental stuff. I think Fred Brooks even, although talking about no silver bullet, kind of said, well, maybe incremental development actually is sort of the thing that kind of gets close to that idea around things. So again, this notion is that kind of like iterative, breaking that down and evolving, kind of small pieces, but, no big bang stuff, but also what that naturally leads to, delivering small features, talking to people, going around the loop a lot of times, whether that be even within the team, with the customer, or whatever. Originally called System antics. I always think of that kind of like antics as in little japes in the system, but that's obviously not what it means. There was a whole thing about weird named stuff, wasn't there? Dr. Dobbs' Journal of Calisthenics and Orthodontia. I don't know. They're a crazy bunch. I don't know what smoking that. Anyway, again, how could I not kind of mention? So the goal is a book in the 80s, although it's been updated to the kind of theory constraints. This was when I finally read this 10 years or so ago, getting around to it late, quite a kind of an eye-opener around the idea of sort of flow, kind of inefficiency. Again, I was sort of had the mindset of I'm a CPU and I'm like spinning around kind of like I want my level 1 cache and pulling code out and doing stuff kind of thing. But actually, which is kind of efficiency. It's me. I want to be typing as fast as I can, throwing stuff in. But certainly within the products and things I work, if I'm trying to work out how I fit in to the rest of the team, the organization, and the customer, then really I should be thinking more on this end, flow. It's about kind of getting, moment I kind of pick a feature up, I want to get it through the door, through into development, working out the other side, iterate on it, see what happens, get customer feedback, get that done. So that it's not like a whole bunch of features I don't really kind of want or really kind of work. That's not really the definition of working. It's actually great. They can do something useful with it. Right, let's kind of go around again. And that involves a different kind of mindset. This is again, thinking about global optimizations and how the team as a whole is working rather than about each kind of individual. So productivity in that sense, it's team level rather than kind of people level. But this is a really interesting book because it's written in the style of as a sort of a novel around somebody working. And it kind of talks about assembly plants and stuff. And how machines. And there's a really kind of key moment in there where there's this realization that leaving a machine being idle for 10 minutes is more beneficial than that machine starting new work, because in the manufacturing industry they're in, to change the tooling is really expensive. So potentially the idea that somebody hasn't always got their head down, typing code and stuff, but actually are available to the rest of the team, maybe to pull them in to do stuff, is part of them, what sort of how the team kind of operates. And actually that's a good thing if people are available. We know that generally, systems, people tend to set their alerting at around the 80% level, the alarm bells go long if 80%, the CPUs are greater than 8%. Seems to be a nice round number. Is that Pareto principle thing, I guess? And people are kind of like the same thing. They kind of like they need capacity, slack, and stuff. And that's the thing that allows people and teams to organize around problems or stuff. So this is a great book. The Phoenix Project, if you've ever read that, it's the same book, but then like 20 years later, set in an IT kind of thing. It's as good, but I personally don't think it's as good as the thing. There's a whole analogy about scouts walking through. It's really good. Anyway, enough of that. So talking about the sort of commits, pull requests thing. This chap was after me at Agile Cambridge back in September. Dragan Stepanovic, I hope I've spoken his name right. And we were kind of turned out we were talking about cylindrish things, but he was on later. His talk was probably much better than mine. But he had this, he kind of like really went in and created this wonderful diagram about about the way that the sort of the general PR model works, where you've got two people, and it's very much about, can you review this? Can we change this? And then it's, again, thinking about kind of like efficiency and flow, how much longer it takes from the point to which somebody starts a piece of work to the point at which it's in the hands of customer. And that kind of feeds into this idea of opportunity cost, or cost of delay, which is a whole idea about if you think of the return on investment, the sooner once we start on a piece of work, it's starting to cost some stuff. It's kind of becoming inventory until the point at which it's in the hands. So the faster we get this into the kind of end user's hands, that basically is the quicker we get our return on investment. Probably works a lot better in a kind of a finance industry because they're obsessed with return on investments and stuff. But just that idea of like when you start something, you want to get through and you want to get to the point at which Not only that, because no plan survives contact with the enemy. If you haven't managed to talk to real customers, only proxy customers, this is the point where you'll probably find out whether you need to rework stuff. And in which case you want to go around that loop really quickly. Anyway, he sort of mapped this out in this wonderful kind of diagram. Yeah, it kind of really shows us. Now, the interesting thing about his talk was he was saying, this is the sort of often the state of play. And then he kind of applied a notion of the limits theorem to, to this, about what happens if we remove this thing, what happens if we remove this review, what happens if we do this. And this whole thing kind of like obviously starts to compress. And then it compresses to the point where these two people are just working at the same time, and they're working on the same thing. So it's almost like this limits theorem pushes you into a point at which these two people are sat next to each other working on something. And that's the thing that makes it, because all of these handovers and delays disappear because now they all happen right here. The moment the code changes is the moment at which it gets reviewed, because it's happening ongoing. And as a consequence, they kind of, they go around and iterate so quickly over stuff. And there isn't really any kind of like PR thing. I mean, you're almost into, potentially also you're then into using trunk-based delivery, because there's no need for a branch. It's been reviewed, it's kind of like been by somebody else, it's been committed. So push it to master, poof, let's go, kind of thing. Which is the way actually I've worked most of my time, but that's more because most of the version control systems I've worked on don't have branches as a feature, so it's nice and easy. But anyway, it's a really good way of sort of thinking about how you can kind of remove those delays and how that happens, because a lot of those are. That isn't to say that, and we'll come back to this thing, that there aren't other design-related things, but for the idea of kind of like smaller pieces of work and stuff, where you can have people, actually, you can, having those people, having their reviews, not having all these insane handovers, tortuous conversations on issues in GitHub, GitLab, or whatever, which just drives me mad when they just go on for whatever. Get in the room, talk to each other kind of thing. Better yet, just kind of go and work it out now. So yeah, this is good. If you see the whole of his talk, it's great when you see him, the way he kind of like compresses things and stuff. So yeah, and that's part of the, in a corporate environment, PRs are very much a kind of a thing. To be clear, in an open source environment, a low trust open source environment, they are kind of a necessity. Well, I'd like to say we've learned from the whole XZ thing, but actually that was a whole other series of issues. But but at least it's kind of like, it is a low trust environment. Most corporate environments are high trust environments, and as a consequence, there are some parts of a process that you don't need, or you should be able to move around, work around, or not partake in, and find other ways to avoid those kind of unnecessary kind of handovers and stuff. And that's kind of what he was talking about here. Cool. So that's the end of my rant about what I think are kind of generally perceived blockers and stuff around this. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about, what does it kind of mean to collaborate on stuff. What are we kind of various kind of facets of kind of like working together, and the things that are the problems we're actually trying to solve with either sort of pairing, kind of mobbing and stuff. Okay. Right. So this is a book that was written 2 years after I was born. Quite old, but fairly kind of, year after I was born, beg your pardon. Great book. And I've used this quite a couple of times. If asked, most programmers would probably say they prefer to work alone in a place where they wouldn't be disturbed by other people. In a cubicle, don't talk to me. And then he follows it up with, the ideas expressed in the preceding paragraph are possibly the most formidable barrier to improved programming that we shall encounter. So right back in the 1970s, Jerry Weinberg kind of identified the fact that, there are people, in organizations who are just in their cubicle, head down kind of thing, very much kind of, again, still involved in that. And I'm sure some of those were, there are some obviously technological things around people and kind of how they're working. But again, he has came up with this idea of egoless programming, this idea that programming is a social activity. And, unless you are a person writing a tool for yourself and you will only be the only user of it, then, which, that definitely does kind of happen, the chances are other people will, you are actually developing something for other people, and as a consequence, you kind of want to know what maybe what they're thinking, and other people want to contribute to that. So if you want other people to contribute to that, then you need to kind of think about how you're going to interact with those people. Either through code or kind of whatever. So this idea of egoless programming, this idea that we are, it's not like me and I will work out what your needs are and I will deliver that thing. Actually, let's kind of talk to it. So, yeah. So this has been around for again, another really good book that I should have read way sooner in my career than I did. Yeah. Okay. So this is my favorite hot take on meetings. And this is from, you can't see this tweet anymore, he's kind of done the migration to Mastodon. Meetings are a complete distraction from coding. Without them, I could work without interruptions on solving the wrong problems. He's being flippant. He's, because, there was, again, recently there was a whole thing about, meetings are people spending time in meetings. But it's, people, when they talk about meetings, are talking generally about meetings where, everybody gets together in some boardroom and, and there's people involved in things and they probably shouldn't be in that meeting because it's dull. They're either not learning, not contributing, or whatever. And that's obviously, that's the perceived idea. And then coming back to the McKinsey report, when they were talking about meetings, that's the kind of thing they're probably talking about. But meetings are all, meetings are just people coming together to talk about stuff. So, we need to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. There is, meetings are about us kind of like talking to other people, whether it's our fellow developers or whether it's testers or BAs or customers and stuff. They are a point. There's another post, and I haven't put a link on it, which is meetings are the work, which again is kind of this idea that it's the collaboration within it which is the most valuable part of our endeavor generally. And so actually we should be careful not to, we need to embrace that to a degree. And it's, and maybe the problem is the way that we're arranging that collaboration, how it's happening is in the wrong form if it's sat in a boardroom or whatever, versus two people sat at a computer. Maybe that's the thing. Maybe me and the customer should be sat together rather than sitting in a board. Maybe it's a whiteboard, maybe it's not, maybe it's a... So we need to be thinking about, we need to be careful what we mean when we're talking about kind of collaborating with people. Yeah. I've just remembered a fellow ACCU person there, actually. So this kind of made me think when I was thinking about stuff for collaboration and ensemble and pair programming, thinking actually there's quite a lot of aphorisms around that idea of kind of working together. And I was trying to think of various things. So two heads are better than one, many hands make light work, the wisdom of crowds, a rising tide lifts all boats. Very, I thought it was very suitable for being in Bristol, kind of classic shipping thing. And a problem shared is a problem halved. So, would anybody disagree with any of these? Would we all kind of agree that they are the truisms? That anybody have a problem with any of those? Just thinking, if you all agree with that, then we could kind of go home now because, like, you've just answered your own question. Yeah, I think there is a lot. Oh, Felix.
In general, I agree with all these quotes. But especially when we come to programming, these many hands make light work. I think there's a certain point where we have an increase in productivity and outcome. At a certain point, if it gets more and more people, then it goes down because the interaction between too many people distracts from the actual work there.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Hopefully, I'll sort of kind of touch on that kind of aspect later when I start to look at the differences between when you might want to do a whole team versus a thing, absolutely will. I'm not, like I say, one side. So, yeah, but as a sort of a general kind of rule, it feels like these generally things are, if I am, I'd be happy to go, and if I'm debugging something, having something, even before kind of getting involved in pairing and stuff, we talk about rubber duck debugging or having somebody come over and kind of work with me because they need to help me see things I can't see, this stuff still applies to kind of code reviews and design reviews and all that kind of stuff. It is very much about the same idea. It's just elongated in kind of time. So I think, they are still, as a fundamental thing, this is generally a good thing, and we should kind of embrace what that's sort of telling us about the way we work. Now, Newton's third law says that, any aphorism has an equal and opposite aphorism. I mean, that's paraphrasing a little bit. And so now we have the kind of like the too many cooks spoil the broth, which which is kind of, I guess, leading to what you're kind of getting to. Which is, I think it is a truism to a large extent. But in my experience, when this thing becomes an issue, maybe this is the kind of like design by committee. This is the kind of this is more when this becomes an issue. This is because people don't understand the level of engagement they are kind of expected. So people nitpicking in a kind of a ensemble session. This is the stuff. These are often it's the dysfunctional behaviours. So this is a truism in a sense that it's not the number of people necessarily that is the issue, but it is the way, it is kind of like we have to think about it. It's the way that those people are interacting with those other people that is kind of, but in the same way that you could obviously say many hands make light work. What that works if we think about the positive effects of what many people are doing rather than the dysfunctional side of people doing. So we need to bear this in mind. But we shouldn't just, trot it out kind of on rote going, this will never work, because you can't have 10 people on one task because clearly too many cooks spoil the broth. It will just be a disaster. You need to decide why you think that is and try and address the issues that will kind of come from people working. There's some truth in it, but it should be a driver for you thinking about how that's kind of, how that's sort of affecting the team. So pairing was this thing that kind of came out in the 90s. Some work with Alistair Coburn, and I'll show you Laurie Williams' book, which kind of came out of that at the end. Some research and stuff around pairing, and a chap called Woody Zuhl, based in America, I think, kind of decided, 2 heads are better than 1. What about 3 heads? What about 4 heads? 5 heads? How far does that go? 6 heads, 7 heads, and you're like, actually, is there a limit? Kind of thing. So he started to explore the ideas of actually bigger groups of people, and like in some cases the whole team, which is like, now you're thinking this is crazy. How on earth can a whole team be involved in a work that absolutely can't be productive? We'll come to that in a second. So he started to kind of do that, and he was working with some teams, and I think they were like originally 4 or 5 people, and there's some videos of them working where they're kind of sat around a screen and stuff. And yeah, he just said, well, let's see what happens if we do that. I guess in a sense that was tapping into the extreme programming thing of the 90s, where there was this idea of like, well, let's turn testing up to 11, and let's turn these other things right up. Let's go over the top on some of these other practices, and then see if those things together kind of like gel in a way that sort of makes the team kind of hyper productive. And yeah, so that was, that's 10 years ago, I think, this whole kind of thing started. He's still kind of convinced that the whole team thing is more often. I'm more guarded about the time when the volume of people is perhaps useful. But he's still, kind of, I met him at Socrates last year, and he still kind of, thinks, but the rules have changed slightly. It's not quite as intense, which we'll see. But again, this idea of like, actually what happens if we do that? And then part of that experiment is to then say, what are the outcomes from that? When does that actually work to have that volume of people, or when does that not work? Potentially, what the stuff. But yeah, he's the person. So they did that. So I would say that So a typical problem, getting a bit more into the kind of like the mechanics and stuff of ensemble programming and the problems we're directly trying to address. Shared understanding, coming to a code base, whether you be a kind of a, you're a new joiner. If you're lucky, you might have some documentation, you might have some tests and stuff. I mean, if you're working on a greenfield project, again, you might be in a different thing, but I've got another example about that later. But generally, you come to a code base. Code bases generally consist of good areas and not so good areas. I mean, might not have any good areas, but but in terms of the good, the bad, there's these are the ways we want to do it. These are the ways that we don't want to do it any longer. And maybe you've got some documentation, and maybe that's good, and maybe that's even in date. Maybe you've got some tests, and maybe those tests are written in kind of a good way, or maybe those tests are just trying to guide people around a code base and steer them into areas. I mean, you could just throw them at them and say, hey, clone the repo, have a rummage around. They are not, unless they sit there and look through every commit and the commit history and stuff, they are not going to know where the weeds are, where the flowers are, where the things are. You need some guidance around a code base to get the most out of it. That is, I mean, you can let people fumble around, hey, but actually, if you want to get things moving in the same kind of direction. So Fred Brooks had this notion of conceptual integrity that he sort of coined, this idea of let's say that idea of the people in the team, the way the system, this is more about the way the system kind of evolved and the code base evolved, is that there are concepts within there that these are the ways we want to do things. And I don't kind of mean necessarily style guidelines, do we use tabs, do we use spaces? That's just kind of stuff. That's not really matter. More about, the way that we might want to approach this, maybe some of the idioms and patterns that we kind of use. That kind of stuff. And particularly, things kind of obviously evolve over time. I mean, those of us who remember like binders and things in C++, like, they were, whereas obviously now you could do all of that with a nice like looking lambda and stuff. I don't think anybody would ever go back and go, oh yeah, clearly that's the right way to use something from the 90s when there's something from, but it's often not always necessarily so obvious, what the kind of patterns and things are. And some of them even might be kind of a little bit kind of experimental. So yeah, basically understanding kind of where we're going. And in some cases, it's things, they are maybe a bit more philosophical around like maybe concurrency models and things that are, that need kind of more kind of involvement. But ultimately, if you want the code base to kind of evolve in the way that you're hoping is, in an integral fashion, and forward, and to be able to refactor stuff and go, yeah, now's a good time to touch that. The team need to kind of agree on where that is, because again, that kind of kicks into the time aspect of how the teams kind of work. When is the right time to kind of maybe touch this, not touch this. So there's sort of so helping people, and it's not just to be clear, this is not a sort of hey, I've got a junior person on the team, I'm a senior person on the team. My job is to kind of guide them. I've worked actually, I've spent more time working in teams with other people of my age or of a similar vintage, who have 20 years experience pairing an ensemble. So we are all experienced people in that sense of the word, or at least we're got a vague idea of what we're doing by now. And so we are all experienced people. But do you know what? Funny enough, we still have disagreements about the way that things could be done or should be done. I'm a really big fan of domain types. Other people are kind of not necessarily aware of some of those things or don't use them to the same kind of extent. I'd rather not abuse date time to hold a date. I'd rather actually have a real date type, that kind of sort of thing. And that's something that each kind of people kind of bring, and then they might drive that and say, we never did this before. Actually, I think going forward, we should use that more. And so, we need to have a discussion kind of about that, or we can try that out somewhere. So that's part of it. It's some of it is kind of like, there was some stuff around the woolly stuff, but more it's about, concepts and stuff. Oren Iney wrote this post years ago called Features and Concepts. I'm sure it has another name in other things, but he talked about the difference between when building a system, you have concepts. They are the kind of like the pillars of your architecture. And then, once you've kind of put those in place, then you have the features, and they're the kind of like the little bits. And it's like, I use this concept in this way to deliver this feature, or, this concept another way. And so there is so that these pillars, the concepts and stuff, these are the things that everybody kind of needs to know in your team. They are the things that, if people don't know that, that's when the really weird, these are kind of tend to be more expensive decisions, or people make really weird, you end up with weirder bugs. And I'm thinking, so concurrency is definitely a kind of like a key thing, I would say here. For example, we're working on a system where we're using a document database where you have no obvious transactions and stuff. So it's a different kind of concurrency model. Making sure that everybody understood in the team of 6 we were at the time, that everybody in the team understood the concurrency model, how we dealt with aspects of the fact that the only things that were atomic were a single document, but we needed to update multiple documents and stuff. Everybody needed to understand that, because if they didn't, we would lose the customer's money by or well, maybe we actually want to give them some money, so maybe they might. But ultimately, we could corrupt the data structures as a consequence of that. It's quite fundamental. These are the kind of things that the concepts, everybody needs to do that. Once everybody's got that, then the little features, the way that we interact, use them, maybe that doesn't kind of need the whole team to kind of do their stuff. So we can kind of split that off. But those are the bits, absolutely, I think, are quite sort of fundamental understanding about architecture and design and things that we kind of want to go to. So yeah, that sort of definitely a design kind of thing. I mean, a lot of people have had design reviews in the past, and make me talk about a whiteboard. That's definitely a kind of an ensemble kind of activity. Maybe what we kind of go through a bit for this is say, just because you understood what you thought understood were the boxes and lines on the diagram doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to translate that or what that looks like in code in the language. And maybe there are choices within the language about how you represent tasks or threads or whatever and primitives. So, this is one part, and that's probably, a bigger part, but actually even in code, translating those and using the same idioms within the code is kind of important as well. And it just, so why not start off and just go, this is what I mean by that. When I talk about these threadable things, these are the features of my runtime and language that I'm talking about, and actually do that sort of kind of first time. Okay, so that's one thing. Another thing that kind of comes out of this, or popular thing, is this idea of shared ownership. A code base is, I've since kind of got quite I don't like the word ownership. I should probably show you this. I recently discovered somebody talking about using the term guardian or the term stewardship. I always find ownership, and again, it doesn't necessarily translate well. People think about ownership in kind of a gatekeeping thing. I've worked with some people who've been very guarded in the past about their code, and I've ended up raising concerns about something that, thought I was being quite polite, saying, hey, why have you got a vector of pointers to strings? It doesn't feel like that's a good pattern. Not using. And he came back with, are you reviewing my code? Did I ask you to review my code? And I'm like, wow, okay. So this is your little kind of fiefdom, your garden. I'll just work with these other people. So, these things kind of happen. People who only work on one piece of code, potentially, obviously quite invested in it. They have quite a lot of emotional attachment to it. That can be troublesome if they've been kind of around a long time. One of the things that, and we'd say, yeah, great, anybody can kind of touch any bit of code. But can they? Or is it easier to just give it to Thingy because, he kind of knows it really well? Great, what happens when he falls under a bus? Could be a little bit awkward because then nobody knows anything about it. So that idea of shared ownership, everybody basically being able to play with anywhere within, change kind of anything. And that doesn't just mean, recklessly. It's like, it's still expected that you would kind of work with some people around it. But that idea that everything's kind of open. And one of the things is that you then try not to become too attached. If you've chosen something, it doesn't, and you maybe you agreed on something, but then maybe it didn't kind of work out, or things could be done in a different way, and somebody suggests a different way, not getting attached to that and kind of, it's like a bit of a sunk cost kind of thing. It was my code, I don't really want, letting go of it and just going, it's great. We have a kind of a relentless refactoring thing, which is a great policy. It just means everything's up for grabs. It doesn't mean that people just change things willy-nilly just because they didn't like your naming convention or they didn't like something about it. It should be a conscious kind of reason for change. People, you need to justify the reason why you went in and kind of did that. And again, there is having somebody next to you at that time. It's like having a little Jimmy Cricket sat on your shoulder, kind of like being a little conscious, just going, really? Are you just changing that because you don't particularly like that, or because you don't like their braces, or is that actually a really good change? And actually having that person kind of sometimes helps you maybe not do some of that kind of stuff that maybe you might have fallen into before because you get away with it. So there's sort of kind of a little honesty. In The Cathedral and the Bazaar, Eric Raymond talks about one of the benefits of open source software is the fact that it's non-territorial. And that's a good thing. Anybody can just go in there and submit pull requests and stuff. And that's a natural kind of aspect of the, of kind of projects. Whereas kind of in a corporate environment, that tends to be kind of sort of less so. So working with other people kind of helps break down some of those things and, makes people feel comfortable changing things in areas that maybe they kind of weren't in. And then it becomes more of a kind of an open playground and kind of open discussion. So I think, it's more kind of democratic and you end up with less kind of fiefdoms. It doesn't mean people don't have their specialist areas in things and stuff, absolutely. And particularly in some products, but the vast majority of things are kind of generally kind of up for grabs. You still would pick somebody who is a expert in one particular area to help that or whatever. But yeah, everything's kind of it's kind of open. Excuse me. I don't have time. Right. And then the other aspect of kind of working together, and this is something I've kind of really enjoyed working with people. Again, this is kind of more on the kind of like senior kind of thing. Obviously for junior kind of, or people kind of just starting out, they have continuous access to something. My eldest is, he's kind of like in his opening couple of jobs. He graduated from university at the time of the pandemic. So he ended up with his first job. And I think the only 2 days he had the office was the day he picked up his laptop and then the day he handed his laptop back in a year later, when he kind of like switched jobs. And for during that year, he had kind of didn't really have an awful lot of access to to people. And this, he's starting out, he's like a sponge. He's kind of like, he wants to learn and talk to people. And he's got to have all these conversations that, most of us have probably had over the years. And he's looking for that kind of interaction with people to help him kind of, not fumble around so much and be guided and stuff. So, there is a natural kind of like coaching, mentoring kind of stuff in the kind of junior, seniory kind of thing, which people, like, and that's about training our future breed of developers. I don't know, maybe the OpenAI community seem to think that we can get rid of all the junior programmers and we just have senior programmers, the co-pilot. I'm not sure how that's going to play out in 10 years, 20 years' time when we all retire. But hey, that's by the, shareholder value will have gone up in the short term and we'll all worry about it. But anyway, so there are a whole load of people out there trying to, kind of learn and do stuff. So working together with somebody all the time is kind of a good, can be a good way of, there are definitely conversations you would have sat there talking about things that you probably wouldn't have because you wouldn't feel in a kind of a PR thing, you might think it's a bit nitpicky or whatever. But actually some things that feel a little bit nitpicky in that actually are ripe for a little conversation just at that kind of like point about things, which actually can evolve into more interesting discussions about namings and patterns and types and things and stuff. And concepts often kind of come out of some of those things. A lot easier to have that when you're kind of sort of chatting to somebody. So that's a kind of a more natural balance. But even on the kind of like the senior level, I know, I'm pretty sure that I don't use the same text editor as anybody else in my team. And I'm sure nobody in our team, like, if you always got a Vibe person, an Emacs and a VS Code person, a VS Studio, or somebody will use, PowerShell, or somebody use Bash. So just like everybody just seems to use, there is a core set of tools that you need to deliver and build the product, but maybe people use a lot of other stuff. watching other people work is always, I found fascinating. People just, how did you do that? What did you type in your editor there? And you'd be like, how did you run that test in kind of isolation? Well, it was Control-Shift-T-Z-1. And that, oh, okay, I didn't know that kind of thing existed. You know, it's so learning about, you know, how to use tools and stuff. Like, I mean, the first time I came across multi-line cursors and stuff in Sublime was watching somebody who used Sublime. And you know, just selected a whole bunch of random bits of text all the way through a document. And you went, whoa, go back. How did you do that? I mean, that doesn't come out of a code, you know, pull request. I don't see how somebody got to this, that code got to the state. I didn't see how they interacted with their tools to make that happen. Or maybe how they came up with, you know, a number and a thing. Oh, let's run a little SQL query over thing. Oh, what was that? How did you, where did you get that from? And so there's a lot of, I find there's a lot of those little things. How people work, what they actually do, what they type, what they use, what tools they use, how they use those tools. And then obviously, you know, discussions kind of come out of some of those things. Yeah, so I again, even as a kind of a senior person, you know, a lot of people have explored, they've worked in lots of different places. They've got even those kind of things. Great, I'm always kind of like, feel like I'm always learning stuff off of people. And ideally, that's leading to just like not doing things in a stupid way, but also, you know, not making certain kind of mistakes or just thinking about things in other way and other tools. So, yeah, so I think, you know, working with people closely, there's still a lot to learn about a lot of things. And similarly, when I was talking about kind of like domain types and stuff, that feels like, to me, that's been around for like ever, because I got it from the Boost book, Abraham's book, talking about units and measures and stuff. People who've worked in that world, it's quite common to kind of them. But then people who haven't worked in that kind of world, it's just nothing they've met before. So you could have been doing this for 25, 30 years, and it's just a thing that you just don't know. And then somebody mentions it, and you're kind of like, oh, what's all that about? You know, how does that look? So yeah, there's a lot of things we can kind of like, you know, get out of those kind of conversations we have that are all those little things, again, rising tide kind of stuff. Last of all, it's fun. Now, I accept that if I'm standing on a stage, you know, talking to a bunch of people, that probably puts me in the extrovert camp. So, you know, that kind of like naturally puts me in painted as a particular sort of person, you know, so whereas I accept that there are a whole load of people for whom standing on a stage and talking is absolutely scares the hell out of, and they are not that kind of, they need a different kind of, you know, environment. So when I say it's fun, you know, for the people I've generally worked with, they kind of generally enjoyed it too. It is to come back to the egoless prosciutto, it's a social activity, and as a consequence, working very closely with somebody is quite a social, you know, it's a social thing. It's not just all work, work, work. It's kind of as in like, you know, you often find stuff out about your team and things. You don't have to wait for the annual team building exercise to discover somebody loves base jumping off of mountains and whatever. You know, there's kind of little things that come out of that, which again kind of helps, you know. You see where, you know, people come from. So there's very much kind of like an intermediate kind of social thing about the way they're on. To be clear, I would never. But I've also worked with some people who would felt very uncomfortable about that. We had a team of 7 some years ago, and there was one person he really didn't want to be involved in the ensembles. There were some aspects around infrastructure he was not interested. He says, I genuinely don't care about that. But also, he kind of enjoyed. He was, you know, he was a useful member of the team. It would have been silly to have got rid of him just because he didn't like working the rest of the way we worked, because he still had valuable contributions to make and stuff. And it wasn't that he wanted to work in his own kind of like cubicle and not talk to anybody. He just didn't feel comfortable in kind of the big groups, but actually began to feel a little more comfortable. So again, I wouldn't force people to kind of be involved in that. It's something which, you know, kind of generally evolves and stuff. And hopefully some people are naturally guided because they've worked in places where people haven't necessarily been very nice, or they are, you know, people are quite protective. But eventually some people over time kind of maybe open up more to kind of the idea you do a little bit of pairing on small things. And then realize that it's not so scary. It turns out that everybody else in the team isn't just gonna like complain about every small thing they do. And actually they'll And what comes back from, it's like that, so there's no sort of microaggressions, and the opposite way around it's kind of like micro sort of positivisms, I guess, is that there's a lot of, you can work with somebody and build their confidence up on a kind of continual basis and kind of like, oh yeah, I like you did this, I like you did. PRs are really horrible. They're quite brutal often, where the only thing that comes in is like, well, I didn't like this and I didn't like this and you didn't like this. It's like, great, thanks. Like, some people you have to work really hard to just go, I liked this, it just doesn't, I mean, it feels very un-British, I know that, I don't know about other cultures. So, trying to just, wasting a comment that says, I like you, it's not, it's kind of like trying to sort of balance that kind of good and bad stuff out. I find that's much easier working directly with somebody because it feels like and it feels more genuine that you're kind of like, oh yeah. So, yeah, so I enjoy it. The people I work with generally enjoy it, but I know that not everybody does. So, but maybe some people enjoy it to some extent, more, less, others. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this last kind of section is sort of maybe to look at a bit more about those kind of scenarios. We've talked about, or I've talked about, the, how things we're kind of like generally trying to solve and how we're trying to adjust the team to work stuff. But there's very much a not one size fits all. So ensemble programming, when is this, for me, when this has really worked well, or in the teams where it's worked really well? And I genuinely mean the whole team. In most cases, the whole team working on a feature for a kind of period of time. To give you some concrete example, so the concurrency, no document thing, the entire team of 6 spent 1 week working on the basic story, vertical slice through the product to, on a loyalty card thing, to kind of add some points to their loyalty card kind of thing. And in that one feature, we tackled the kind of the concurrency model, how we updated stuff, and we worked on that one thing for the week, sat round and code together. So that was the kind of the whole sort of day. That made, and I'll be honest, that made the management people really nervous. They were like, when are you gonna sort of get back to the tackling lots of stuff? It seems like you've done one thing. And every day I kind of had to go, if we get this wrong and we corrupt something, I think the customers will become upset and they'd go, yeah, oh yes, you're right about that, carry on. And then like the following day, we're like, yeah, but it feels like we're not doing. And I like, this is the essence of the entire system. This is the essence of the problem. All the other stuff is just kind of stuff. If we have to get. So yeah, that was like a 1 week thing. And then we kind of like broke off and did stuff. So that was a great thing because it was all about all of us understanding, and we were having to understand Couchbase. Well, we ended up switching from Couchbase to Mongo, but we had to understand that, the models of that, plus how we were going to represent that in C# and using extension methods, or how we want to, and then the notion of retries and stuff, what that kind of pattern was going to look like. So we worked on all those kind of bits of code and stuff. So for me, that is about like where everybody, or certainly the vast majority of people, need to be involved in something. Another stuff, it was on a greenfield project, kind of starting out, where we were working on putting together the kind of walking skeleton for a project. And we all had sort of some different experiences around automation. And it was going to involve some front-end stuff and some back-end stuff. So we kind of like mobbed on parts of the delivery pipeline, in that instance, there were a whole load of choices. Do we use PSARCI or do we use Gulp? And where are we using Node? And what are we using? Are we going to set up Jenkins or TeamCity or So there was kind of like lots of conversations around what's an initial kind of pipeline going to work like. And some of that, of course, there was some couple of people who come from the click the buttons in TeamCity crowd, and then there was those of us who said, no, we want everything to be runnable locally. We will build the scripts to whatever tools, and then we just want the tool to run it for us because we want to make it reproducible, that kind of stuff. There was all loads of conversations around that. Again, that was a really good thing for kind of a week or sort of 2 weeks, getting that skeleton up, and then also working out some basic technology directions around what we're going to do stuff. And then again, we kind of sort of split off. So it's been quite a few of those. More recently, I did some stuff with Jess Higgins, you know, and we did, there was like, again, 5 or 6 of us. And we were working on a 10-year-old C++ code base front end for a product. And it needed kind of, we were adding some accessibility support to it. Some of us haven't done any ATL and MFC for a very long time. So we were kind of, and we needed to kind of work out, we needed to adding this to an old code base, we were sort of trying to work out how to come up with some ideas about how we needed to tap into the accessibility features in Windows. And then we came up with kind of like some little controls. So again, that was the thing where we knew that the way the project was going to work was, first of all, we work out how to do accessibility, add accessibility to a legacy code base. We will come up with some code, and then basically that's the concept, and then the features is basically like, stick that on that dialog, that dialog. And at that point, that's kind of like, that's just, you know, that's making widgets at that point. But the first part of it is how do we fit this in with the, you know, how do we create the control feeds? And there was some, what tied in with that was we were doing, they had some Altuit kind of automation stuff going on, which was kind of a bit ropey. But it was really kind of hard to work out what was going on. And we ended up creating a little DSL around automation that said, oh, when you know, again, showing the guy that was the tester, or kind of like the lead kind of QA chap, we ended up talking to him and saying, well, if we wrap this little bit of code in a function called open context menu, it will read, like, rather than going, why the hell are they sending Shift F10 to this thing, you know? So we ended up creating this little DSL, and then all the tests then started a little automation kind of test. And I loved it because he was kind of, he was like, oh yes, I see why that is really easy and I can do that. But also he was really chuffed to be part of the conversation about, you know, what actually do you do? How do you run these things? What can we help you out? So again, we did quite a lot of sort of, because when it came to doing the dialogue, when it came to us adding the tests for all of these things we were changing, again, once we all had agreed on what that little DSL looked like, great, that's the concept feature. You do that one, you do that one, you do that one, boom. And that's when the kind of the Andal's law kicks in. That's the sequential bit was the concept, and then we kind of go out. So yeah, so that's kind of a thing where you kind of come out with, I would say, yeah, a whole team's kind of involved, and our whole team. Yeah. So, but that's, you know, like I say, that's on a kind of I tend to find that's kind of rare-ish. Depends on whether you're greenfield kind of stuff or what sort of stuff you do. And then pairing this is kind of a more day-to-day kind of thing. Having 2 people, there are things where definitely quite a lot of stuff that you kind of do, it doesn't really involve everybody. We've got a vague idea. Or maybe this is more about kind of a junior-senior thing, so there's like more of a coachy thing kind of going on, or somebody's less sure of an area, so you're kind of like a bit more of an expert in an area and the other person isn't. So there tends to be places where there's often an imbalance, and it's more about having somebody with you because you using that as an opportunity to bump somebody else up and their skills and knowledge and stuff. But also pairing as that's it. We've got 2 eyes. That means that it's been reviewed, we've talked about it and all that kind of stuff. So actually we can just push that straight to trunk, bang, done. No, none of this nonsense branch handover thingy. Let's do it, feature done, move on, next one kind of thing. So I think as a general day-to-day thing, having that just kind of helps move a lot. Helps move the kind of like the flow conversation a lot more. But that's a general kind of thing. A good time to do this, and ensemble as well, is I think that tends to be more obvious. You tend to kind of work out that that's going to happen at a point, just because if the entire team's involved, that has potential to be a little bit more disruptive for other things. Whereas the pairing thing, if you have like some kind of daily stand-up and stuff, that's usually a good time of, if you're working in a kind of a Kanban-y kind of style, whereas like you're looking at the board and you're talking about the work on the board rather than what did I do today? Am I doing tomorrow? It's like, it's very much this thing needs doing. Who's working on that? I'll carry on with that. And then somebody else will go, oh, I'll work with you on that today. And maybe that's the person you worked with yesterday. Maybe it's kind of a different person because that person's at home or that person's, So stand-ups are really good. Having that kind of first thing in the morning is a really good way of the team kind of organising around the work, working out what those pairs might be, whether they carry on, kind of that kind of stuff. It's a really good thing. And then you kind of like can kind of like launch into the day and then do stuff. Actually, one thing I haven't mentioned was the intensity. So ensemble program is quite intense, and pairing it as well can be quite an intense kind of experience. I know I said it's fun, but it's the social part of it is. But it can be, I don't think many people would do it all day. I mean, it might be kind of like might be in blocks of things, depending on the kind of person you're working on, the conversations you're having, how that goes. It might be a matter of a few hours. It might kind of not be, it might be a bit on. So splitting partners across the day, maybe in the morning I'm with X, maybe this person in the afternoon, or maybe we'll carry on and we'll see how it goes after lunch. But yeah, kind of taking a break and swapping things around is always a good thing, or going and such. So just be, it is definitely quite a kind of an intense thing. Make sure you wear lots of deodorant as well if you're in the same thing. Although we'll come to the tooling and remote bit of it. The other thing that's interesting about things and ensemble program is the idea of people kind of interrupting. For the ensemble thing, where kind of, and the whole team, nobody would just walk into a meeting and go, oh, Dave, can I ask you about X? Just doesn't happen. That's right. Whereas like you might be sat at your desk kind of like deeply enrolled, and somebody will still come over and kind of interrupt you. For some reason, we feel more comfortable interrupting a person by themselves when a person's in conversation with somebody else. So there is a sort of a natural kind of like barrier that sits around a pair or a group that kind of like helps them remain kind of focused on the work that they're doing for that period. People won't kind of, unless like, the proverbial shit's hit the fan and like, the production centre's on fire or something, people will generally just kind of leave you alone. And also if they're observing the way the team works, as they did, they'll know that maybe you'll do that for 2 hours and then maybe you'll move on, or you'll have a coffee break, and that will be the time that they come in. But it's on them to kind of sort of, or they'll know, they can be at the stand-up in the morning and ask you, and you're like, well, okay, we're going to do it from this time. So, yeah, that's a kind of a nice, again, a way of helping the team kind of remain focused, is because there's a sort of a bit of a barrier to people, or at least to outside of that. And then the last one is kind of like, being kind of by yourself. Pretty much don't need 7 people to help me manage my inbox. It's not really a thing. I'll fill in my timesheet, that kind of stuff. There's a whole load of stuff we do day to day that really doesn't need to be involving more than one person. Stuff that's not necessarily some documentation stuff, particularly when it's not, doesn't really necessarily need reviewing. So one thing is kind of like administration stuff. That's a taken, and that's so breaking apart, spending some time to do some administration stuff, or if you've got odd side teams, that kind of fits in. There's a whole load of kind of little things. The other thing that I think is important is education. So I think it's nice to have like team wins, and to, as a group, getting kind of positivity out of that. But we all kind of need to also, there's the autonomy, mastery, purpose thing. We need to feel like actually sometimes actually we kind of just want to go and do stuff. And there is nothing wrong with somebody going off and maybe doing a spike around something. I've had this thought about something. Great. But there's a difference between somebody going off and producing a fait accompli and then like going, well, that's it, it's done, versus I've explored this thing, and then maybe you go, actually, I've thought about this thing, but I'd like the whole team. Well, I've got this bit of code here. Maybe we should kind of talk about it together, how we kind of integrate it. So, there's absolutely is room in kind of teams for people to go and do their own stuff and to need to fail as well. I mean, it's not just about kind of doing stuff, but learning stuff is all about kind of like messing up and failing. And some people like to do more of that by themselves, and then just call somebody in when they kind of need to, or exploring stuff. So definitely don't assume that like everything is like you. That all of a sudden you're just like another number in the office. You know, you're still a person. You're an individual. You've got character. You've got all that stuff. That still needs to come through within a team. In Horton. Yeah. So I just realised I thought I had a slide about wisdom of crowds, but that seems to have kind of did I skip over that by accident? Yeah, which was to say that there is something about obviously the idea of wisdom of crowds is that it's diversity of thought, or people can put things into conversation. So, and that's a really important thing. But at the same time, everybody's still their own person, and they bring something to it, whether that be knowledge and skills in areas and stuff. So, yeah. So it's not all this, all this, all this. It's a day, a week, month. It can just be ebbs and flows. In and out, the team deciding how it's, ensemble this bit, pair that bit of that, working out days and stuff. Which just also makes it kind of quite interesting, the day kind of flows. And that flows around the product, which is, all of this is, again, coming back to the kind of the pipeline, what's come in, working software in the hands of the customers, needing to go around the loop to deliver something, reprioritizing on the day. It's like, Scrum, the stand-ups and stuff are not about who's doing what in terms of status. It's about reprioritizing the work, thinking about how the team is going to act together and stuff. So it's a kind of we ebb and flow on a day basis. Tooling. It's kind of a lot easier now than it was in terms of editors and stuff and things. Sometimes it's just a projector in a meeting room, like a boardroom. Laptops are a bit awkward because they don't slide very easily. So maybe have a keyboard on the laptop, and the keyboard, you can spin that around. We used to have a type, don't talk kind of thing. People trying really hard to talk about what they want to happen. It's like, don't do that. Push the keyboard to them. Just type. It doesn't have to compile. It doesn't have links. It's just like, just type some ideas out, and then we'll talk about it. Just because it's like, what does it look like in code? Because that's ultimately how it's going to be. So make it easy for people to do, and kind of, getting people to kind of contribute and stuff. So it's, but yeah, basically that's one thing. Nice big screen is nice, projector. And yeah, you can kind of do pairing around a laptop's a little bit easier because obviously you're quite a bit closer, but for a bigger group, a bit more. Remote is kind of a bit more interesting because obviously you're not kind of in the same room. Sometimes we've had things where we've had an open Zoom call and everybody's been on it, and then we might have been doing a little bit by ourselves or in pairs, and then all of a sudden we kind of like switch, and then somebody will kind of, and then we'll go off into chat. So you often just have that into a little breakout kind of room, and then we'd have them on the screen. And sometimes that would be a screen. It used to be a lot of screen share type stuff, whereas now with something like VS Code, the live share stuff, it's much easier. And you can, because one of the things is key bindings. I'm a Visual C2 person. I haven't changed my key bindings in 25 years, and I'm really hard to, I can't get used to the modern ones. So somebody else would come in, they're a bit younger, and they've got Visual C later key bindings. So how do I do is it Shift F8? Oh man, I've deleted the project, that kind of thing. So key bindings is, or the editor that's up is quite hard. One of the things with things like VS Code is I can have my key bindings, you have your key bindings, and it's multi-cursors. It's all that kind of like Google Docs type stuff, which is just great. And if you're remote, then you can have a little video call up and talking to each other, but you can see the cursors moving around. And again, you just type stuff in. It's just really easy. And I'm sure that the Emacs File World have their equivalents of that kind of stuff. So definitely, last few years, barriers really dropped around having multiple people kind of collaborate on stuff. And then there's things like mirror boards and whiteboards. So if you do need to do some jewelry kind of stuff, then they've been around a lot longer. So I think generally that's generally you can kind of like make things work in a thing. And maybe if you are pairing on a laptop and you don't know the editor and stuff, that doesn't mean you can still contribute. It might just be that maybe you just let somebody else do the typing because you don't know the weird VI key bindings and stuff. But you can still pretty much get the most out of it. Finally, if you look into some statistics and all that kind of stuff, this was kind of the book. It's quite old now. I want to say it's 20 years old. Good luck getting a copy for like less than 100 quid these days. It's in kind of imprint, but it's quite rare. but yeah, this talks about combinations. This is very much about pairing. Assembling obviously came like 10 years after, so it doesn't cover that. But it often talks about pairs that work in terms of senior, junior stuff. Particularly points out that two juniors left to their own devices isn't really a good thing because they get into weird states and they don't know how to get out of it. So that's sort of a kind of a thing you really kind of want somebody. So maybe it's even a 3 kind of. But anyway, there's some good stuff around that. The research that Alistair Coburn was also involved in, I think the PDF for that, if you search carefully, actually comes up. So you can get the essence of the book and some of the research is freely available. Then that got turned into the book, which is harder to come by. Yeah, this is, but yeah, John Jagger from, for those of you know from ACCU, he kind of put me onto that. Yeah, so that's kind of like, I'm not aware of anything more recent but there's a lot of good stuff kind of in there around studies and things. That's it really. I don't have a book or anything, but so blog and articles. This talk is kind of based on an article I wrote in ACCU 2018 in case it had a familiar feel to ring to it. So which is it was in Seaview, so you can't get be a member and then you can read it in print film. But if not, it's on there, and that covers kind of a lot of the stuff. But that's it really. Yeah. Oh, look at that. 7 minutes left for questions.